He paraded his mistress in front of the city's elite, forcing his wife to watch. He stood on stage at the most exclusive gala of the year, holding an award, and called his wife a simple woman, a hobbyist he kept around to remind him of his humble beginnings. The room fell silent, the humiliation hanging thick in the air. But he made one mistake. He didn't just humiliate his wife. He did it in a room full of people, including her mother. And he's about to find out that his wife's simple mother is the one who owns the room the award, and now his entire future. The air in the penthouse was suffocating thick with the scent of Gregory's expensive Tom Ford cologne and Lena's silent anxiety. Outside, the lights of Central Park West glittered like a carpet of diamonds, but inside Lena felt trapped in a perfectly curated high-gloss prison. Is that really what you're wearing?" Gregory's voice sliced through the silence. He didn't look at her, not directly. He was adjusting the onyx cufflinks on his bespoke shirt, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, his only audience. Lena looked down at her dress. It was a deep, almost black sapphire velvet, simple long-sleeved with a modest boat neck. It was an archival Bottega Veneta piece, something she had owned for years, long before Gregory had even heard of the brand. It was quiet, elegant, and screamed old money in a way Gregory's flashy, logo-driven wardrobe never could. Yes, Lena said, her voice small. "I've always loved this dress." "You've always loved it," Gregory mimicked, finally turning. His eyes, cold and assessing, raked over her. Lena was a stunning woman. Her dark skin seemed to glow against the deep blue velvet, and her hair was pulled back in an elegant, intricate knot. But Gregory didn't see beauty. He saw a lack of effort. "Lena, this is the Metropolitan Foundation Gala. This isn't one of your little bakery fundraisers. This is my night. I'm receiving the Pinnacle Award. People will be watching. My people. And I am not your people." She asked the words, barely a whisper. Gregory sighed, a theatrical sound of immense suffering. "Don't be dramatic. You know what I mean. I need you to look the part. That thing, it's drab. It's depressing. Bianca is having her dress flown in from Paris. It's Atelier Versace. That is what the part looks like." Bianca. The name hung in the air, a toxic cloud. Bianca, his new executive assistant, a woman whose resume was as thin as the fabric of her dresses. "Bianca is your assistant, Gregory. I am your wife," Lena said, her hands clenching at her sides. "And as my wife, your job is to reflect me, to reflect my success." He stormed over to her, grabbing her arm. His grip was just a little too tight. "I built this. I built Lawson Innovations from the ground up. I dragged us into this world, and you seem determined to cling to your simplicity. My bakery is a multi-million-dollar business, Gregory." Lena said the same argument they'd had 100 times. "It's a hobby," he spat. "It's a cute little place where you play with flour. I am dealing in global logistics in AI, in a future you can't even comprehend. Tonight, the board of the Metropolitan Foundation will be there. The anonymous benefactor J.D. is rumored to be making their first public appearance. This is the big league, Lena, and you look like you're dressed for a funeral." "Maybe I am," she said, pulling her arm free. His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "Nothing. I'll put on the diamond necklace you bought." It was a garish, heavy piece of jewelry, new money screaming for attention. She hated it. good. And try to look happy. Try to look impressed. When I'm on that stage, I want you to look at me like you understand what I've accomplished." "I know exactly what you've accomplished, Gregory." He took that as a compliment, giving her a satisfied, predatory smile. "Exactly. Now don't be late. The car is downstairs, and for God's sake, put on some lipstick. You look washed out." He swept out of the room, leaving her alone with her reflection. The woman staring back at her looked tired, her eyes hollow. She had met Gregory when he had nothing but a laptop and a desperate, charming energy. She had been the one to invest her own savings, a small trust fund, from her grandfather to get his company off the ground. She had coached him, edited his proposals, and believed in him. And he had, in turn, erased her. She picked up her phone. A single text message was waiting. "Landing at Teterboro now. I'll see you at the event. Remember who you are, my love." Lena's fingers trembled. Her mother. Josephine. The one person Gregory had always refused to meet, dismissing her as a drifting hippie who lived off the grid in Wyoming. He had no idea. Lena had kept it that way. She had wanted just once to be loved for herself, not for her name. Not for the Devereaux billions. She looked at the garish necklace Gregory wanted her to wear. Then she looked back at the simple velvet dress. With a sudden cold resolve, she left the necklace in its box. She would not be his prop. Tonight, she would be herself. The Plaza Hotel was a fortress of light and power. The entrance to the grand ballroom was flanked by paparazzi, their cameras flashing like epileptic stars, capturing the arrival of New York's old guard and new titans. Gregory, stepping out of the black Mercedes Maybach, was in his element. He preened, adjusting his Tom Ford bow tie, offering the cameras his practiced million-dollar smile. He turned his hand outstretched, expecting Lena to take it. When she emerged, his smile faltered, hissing through his teeth. "You didn't wear the necklace." "It didn't go with the dress," Lena said calmly, her voice surprisingly steady. The cold night air had cleared her head. "The dress doesn't go with the event," he snapped, keeping the smile plastered on his face for the cameras. He grabbed her hand and pulled her close, his fingers digging into her side. "Smile, Lena. You look like you're attending an execution." "I am," she thought. "The execution of my marriage." They walked the crimson carpet. The murmurs started almost immediately. Gregory was a known quantity, the brash, handsome founder of Lawson Innovations, the new darling of the tech sector. But Lena was an enigma. She was rarely seen at these events. "Who is that?" A woman with a face pulled tight by surgery whispered to her companion loud enough for Lena to hear. "That's the wife, Lena Lawson. She runs a cupcake shop, I think." "A cupcake shop, good Lord. He's receiving the Pinnacle Award and he brings a baker. And that dress, it's so plain. Did she get lost on her way to a staff meeting?" Gregory heard it all. He squeezed her side harder, a silent, painful command to stand taller, to look less common. But Lena couldn't. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, all judging, all dismissing. She saw the other women draped in couture, dripping with diamonds that were unlike hers, worn with an air of absolute entitlement. And then the sea of black and white parted. Bianca had arrived. She was a supernova of manufactured beauty. Her dress was, as Gregory had promised, Atelier Versace, a cascade of gold chains and scarlet silk that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Her hair was platinum blonde, her smile sweet and predatory. She wasn't just dressed to kill. She was dressed for a hostile takeover. The cameras loved her. Bianca, who are you wearing?" "Versace, darling." she purred, blowing a kiss. Gregory's mask slipped. A look of genuine, possessive hunger crossed his features. He dropped Lena's hand as if it were burning hot. "Gregory, darling," Bianca shrieked, gliding over. She completely ignored Lena, wrapping her arms around Gregory's neck and kissing him full on the mouth, right there on the red carpet. The cameras exploded. Flash. 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 Lena stood frozen 2 feet away. She was invisible. The humiliation was so profound, so public, it was almost surreal. It wasn't just an affair. It was a public declaration. He was replacing her. "Bianca, you made it," Gregory said, his voice husky. He didn't push her away. He held her waist, his hand splayed possessively on the bare skin of her back. "I wouldn't miss your big night for the world, baby," she whispered, tracing the lapel of his jacket. "We have so much to celebrate." She finally turned her eyes to Lena. She looked her up and down, a perfect painted brow arching in disdain. "Oh, hello, Lena. I almost didn't see you there. That dress is very modest." "Bianca," Lena said, her voice tight. "Gregory," a gala organizer said, rushing over his face a mask of frantic politeness. "Mr. Lawson, your table is ready, right at the front." "Of course," Gregory said. He put one arm around Bianca's waist. He looked at Lena, his eyes flat. "Well, are you coming?" He didn't offer his arm. He didn't wait for her. He simply turned and walked into the ballroom, his mistress on his arm, leaving his wife to follow behind them like a servant. Lena stood for a moment, the flashing lights blinding her, the sound of the crowd roaring in her ears. She had 2 choices. She could turn around, call a cab, and go home. Or she could see this through to its bitter, inevitable end. She thought of her mother's text. "Remember who you are." Straightening her spine, her head held high. Lena Lawson walked into the ballroom. She was no longer just following him. She was going to witness his downfall. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of opulent vulgarity. Each table centerpiece was a towering explosion of orchids and feathers dripping with crystals. The clinking of silverware on porcelain and the low hum of self-important conversation filled the air. Lena was seated at the head table, table 1, but her position was a mockery. Gregory had placed himself at the head. To his right, in the seat of honor that should have been Lena's, sat Bianca. Lena was placed to his left, but shoved down 1 seat next to a geriatric banking executive who had already fallen asleep in his soup. The message was clear. Bianca was the new priority. Lena was an afterthought. "Isn't this just breathtaking?" Bianca breathed, sipping her champagne. She was talking to Gregory, but her voice was pitched for the whole table to hear. "It's just power. You fit right in, Gregory." "We fit right in." Gregory corrected his hand, rubbing small circles on her back. Lena stared at her plate. She didn't eat. She drank water, the cold liquid a small anchor in the churning sea of her nausea. She watched them. They whispered, they laughed, they fed each other small bites of appetizers. It was a performance, a grotesque, intimate play designed for one audience member, her. After what felt like an eternity of filet mignon and polite applause for minor donors, the host, a famous news anchor, took the stage. "And now the moment we've all been waiting for," the anchor boomed. "The Metropolitan Foundation's Pinnacle Award for Innovation and Leadership. This award goes to a man who has truly redefined his industry. From a small startup to a global powerhouse, Lawson Innovations is changing the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Mr. Gregory Lawson." The room erupted in applause. Gregory stood buttoning his jacket. He kissed Bianca a long, lingering press of lips that made the table fall silent. Then, as an afterthought, he glanced at Lena and gave her a sharp, warning look. "Behave." He bounded onto the stage, shaking the host's hand, accepting the heavy crystal award. He soaked in the applause, his arms raised. "Thank you, thank you." He began, his voice smooth and practiced. "What an incredible honor. To be recognized by the Metropolitan Foundation. It's just... wow." He started with the usual platitudes. He thanked the board. He thanked his team. He spoke about synergy and disruption and scalable futures. Lena could have recited the speech by heart. She'd written the first draft of it. Then his tone shifted. He looked down at his table. "You know, people see me up here," he said, "and they see the success. They see the penthouse, the private jet, the name on the building. But they don't see the struggle. They don't see the beginning." He smiled a wide, disingenuous grin. "But I have a living, breathing reminder of that beginning. Every single day." He pointed, not at Bianca. He pointed directly at Lena. The spotlight operator, confused, shifted the beam. It landed on Lena, pinning her to her chair. She was suddenly illuminated, every eye in the room on her. "My wife, Lena," Gregory said. The room gave a polite, confused smattering of applause. "When I met Lena, I had nothing. And she had a little less than that." A few nervous titters. Gregory fed on it. "She's a simple woman," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "A woman of simple tastes. While I'm out here building an empire, she's at home. Baking. Yes, baking. Cookies, cupcakes, little pies. It's adorable." The humiliation was a physical thing. Lena felt it land on her, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She could feel the pitying stares, the quiet, vicious judgment. "And I love her for it," Gregory said, the lie tasting like acid in Lena's ears. "I love that she keeps me grounded. She reminds me that no matter how high I fly, there's always someone back on Earth worrying about whether the brownies are too moist." The room was dead silent. The titters had died. This wasn't a charming anecdote. It was a public execution. Gregory, sensing he was losing them, tried to recover. "She's my rock. My simple, unshakable rock. While I'm here with the brilliant minds, the artists, the real movers and shakers," he gestured to Bianca, who preened. "I know she's at home. Or, well, here in this case." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "She's probably wondering what all these forks are for." That was it. That was the final cut. The mask of polite society had been ripped away, revealing the monster beneath. Lena didn't cry. She didn't look down. She kept her eyes locked on her husband, her gaze so cold, so steady. It was a wonder he didn't freeze solid. "So thank you," Gregory said, finally sensing he had gone too far. He raised his award. "Thank you to the foundation, and thank you to my wife, for always reminding me just how far I've come." He walked off the stage to a stunned, lukewarm applause. He returned to the table, his face flushed with adrenaline and champagne. He sat down, ignoring Lena, and immediately grabbed Bianca's hand. "How was I? You were magnificent, baby," Bianca whispered, kissing his knuckles. "You told the truth." "Yes," Gregory said, glancing at Lena, his eyes filled with triumph and malice. "I did." Lena picked up her water glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a slow, deliberate sip, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The sound was as loud as a gunshot, in the silence of their table. She set the glass down, and she waited, because she knew what was coming next. The humiliation settled over Lena, not as a hot flush of shame, but as a clarifying Arctic cold. The noise of the gala, the music, the chatter, all of it faded into a distant roar. Her world had shrunk to the few feet of damask tablecloth between her and the man she had once loved. Gregory was basking in the toxic glow of his own cruelty. He and Bianca were now posing for selfies, the crystal award held between them. He was openly, flagrantly erasing Lena from his life, right in front of her. A waiter appeared, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes darted to Lena with a flicker of pity. "Ma'am, would you care for some coffee?" Lena shook her head, unable to trust her voice. She felt rather than saw the stares of the other guests. They weren't looking at Gregory the victor. They were looking at her, the victim. They were staring with that morbid curiosity reserved for car crashes and public failures. She wanted to run. She wanted to throw her glass of water in Gregory's smug face, flip the table and scream. But she was not a simple woman. She was a Devereux. And Devereux women did not make scenes. They made ends. Her phone buzzed on her lap. She looked down. Another text from her mother. "He's even worse than I imagined. Are you ready?" Lena typed a single word back. "Yes." She put the phone away and looked up, scanning the vast, opulent room. And that's when she saw her. In a discreet, shadowed alcove near the back of the ballroom, far from the power tables at the front, sat a woman. She was not young. She was not flashy. She was dressed in a severe, exquisitely tailored navy blue acris suit. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a chignon that was as elegant as it was practical. Her only jewelry was a simple pearl necklace and a man's-style Patek Philippe watch. She was watching. She wasn't watching the stage or the crowd. Her gaze was fixed like a sniper's scope on table 1, on Gregory, on Bianca, and on Lena. This was her mother, Josephine Devereux. To the rest of the room, she was a nobody. An older, well-dressed guest, perhaps a donor's +1. But Lena knew the truth. That suit, while appearing simple, was custom-made and cost more than Gregory's car. That simple watch was a grand complications model worth a small fortune. And the woman wearing them was at that moment the single most powerful person in the room. Josephine had built an empire from her father's small Wyoming land grant, turning it into Devereux Holdings, a silent, sprawling behemoth of energy logistics and high-end hospitality. She was notoriously private, her name never appearing on any rich list, because she'd structured her companies to be utterly impenetrable. She was the definition of stealth wealth. And she was, as Gregory had so mockingly guessed, the mysterious keynote speaker. The anonymous J.D. As Lena watched, Josephine caught her eye. She gave no sign of recognition, no smile of comfort. Instead, she gave Lena a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of confirmation. The plan is in motion. Stay strong. A new kind of energy surged through Lena. The ice in her veins turned to steel. The shame was burned away by a cold, righteous fury. Gregory had called her simple. He had called her a rock. He was about to find out what happens when you try to build your flimsy, fraudulent house on a rock you don't own. The rock doesn't just sit there. The rock moves, and it crushes everything in its path. The host returned to the stage, his smile looking a little forced. "Thank you, Gregory Lawson, for that very speech, he said, stumbling slightly. And now we have a very special treat. For the first time, the founder and chief benefactor of the Metropolitan Foundation has agreed to address us. We know her only by her initials, J.D. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ms. Josephine Devereux. At table 1, Gregory's head snapped up. Devereux. He whispered, his brow furrowing. Where have I heard that name before? Bianca, reapplying her lipstick, shrugged. Sounds old and boring. Lena just smiled. She turned in her chair, her entire body angled toward the stage, and watched as her mother, the drifting hippie, stood up from her table in the back and began to walk toward the stage. The simple woman was about to meet the source code. The walk from the back of the ballroom to the stage was not long, but Josephine Devereux commanded every inch of it. The room, which had been buzzing about Gregory's speech, fell into a profound, curious silence. She moved with an unhurried, undeniable authority. She was not a socialite. She was not a celebrity. She was, it was clear to everyone, power. At table 1, Gregory watched, his eyes narrowed. Devereux. Devereux. Lena, isn't that your mother's maiden name? Lena said nothing. She just smiled, a small, private smile that for the first time all night was genuine. Don't be ridiculous, Gregory muttered, more to himself than to her. Her mother is some broke artist in Wyoming. This is just a coincidence. Josephine reached the stage. She did not wait for the host to hand her the microphone. She took it from the stand herself. She stood in the center of the stage, bathed in the same spotlight that had minutes earlier been used to humiliate her daughter. She didn't smile. She simply surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the tables of billionaires, senators, and socialites. Her eyes lingered for just a second on table 1. Good evening, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was deep and resonant, and it carried to every corner of the room without effort. My name is Josephine Devereux. For 20 years I have funded this foundation anonymously. I did so not out of modesty, but for clarity. I wanted the work to speak for itself, not the name attached to it. I wanted to see who would be drawn to the mission and who would be drawn to the money. Her eyes found Gregory's. He shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The Metropolitan Foundation, Josephine continued, is built on one principle. Integrity. We honor those who build, not those who take. We honor those who create value, not those who simply and loudly claim it. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the light, self-congratulatory speech they were used to. Tonight, Josephine said, we honored Mr. Gregory Lawson with the Pinnacle Award for Innovation, an award, I might add, that comes with a $50 million grant for his company, Lawson Innovations. Gregory's eyes widened. He hadn't known about the grant. Bianca gasped, her hand flying to her chest. 50 million? A substantial amount, Josephine agreed, as if reading her mind. A sum we do not bestow lightly. It is meant to reward not just financial success, but moral character. The character of a leader. The character of a man. She began to pace the stage slowly, her presence dominating the room. I am, as Mr. Lawson might say, a simple woman. I was born in Wyoming. My father was a rancher. He left me land, and I built on it. I built quietly. I built slowly. I built things that last. I learned on that land that you can't fake a foundation. You can't build a skyscraper on soft ground. You can't build a legacy on lies. It will inevitably collapse. Gregory was now staring at her, his face pale, a dawning, sickening horror in his eyes. He was connecting the dots. Wyoming. Simple. Devereaux. He knows. Lena whispered the words, a quiet, satisfying hiss. But the most important thing I ever built, Josephine said, her voice softening for the first time, was not a company. It was my daughter. She turned and looked directly at Lena. This time her gaze was filled with a fierce, protective love. My daughter. I taught her to be strong. I taught her to be kind. I taught her to see the value in hard work, whether it was in a boardroom or, yes, in a bakery. The entire room turned as one to look at Lena. She was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the focal point of a new, terrifying narrative. I also taught her. Josephine's voice hardened again, that money should be a tool, not a shackle. So she decided when she fell in love to hide her name, to hide her inheritance. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what or for what she had. She wanted a partner, a genuine partner built on a real foundation. Josephine's eyes swung back to Gregory. They were not angry. They were a colder, more terrifying emotion. Disgusted. And she ended up with, you. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet, Lena could hear the faint hiss of the audio feedback from the microphone. Gregory looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth was open, his skin a waxy greenish white. He was staring at Lena, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound, it was almost comical. Lena, he whispered. Bianca, on the other hand, was doing quick, panicked math. Her eyes darted from Josephine to Lena and back to Gregory. She was realizing in real time that she had hitched her wagon to a dead horse. On stage, Josephine was just getting started. Mr. Lawson, she said, her voice like velvet-covered steel. You stood on this stage and you mocked your wife. You called her simple. You mocked her little hobby. She gave a dry, humorless laugh. Let me educate you on simple. You see that simple dress my daughter is wearing? It's an archival, one-of-a-kind Bottega Veneta from my personal collection. Its insured value is $300,000. But you wouldn't know that. It doesn't have a big, flashy logo. A wave of gasps. The woman who had mocked Lena's dress looked like she was about to faint. And her little hobby, Josephine continued, her bakery, Lena's Kitchen. Let me tell you about that hobby. 3 years ago, Devereaux Holdings, my company, acquired a 49% stake in her business. We began a quiet rollout. As of last quarter, Lena's Kitchen is the sole exclusive patisserie provider for all 180 Devereaux Grand Hotels worldwide. Her little hobby cleared $75 million in profit last year. The sound in the room was a collective strangled gasp. Gregory made a small choking sound. But wait, I'm not finished, Josephine said, holding up a hand. Mr. Lawson, you spoke of your company. Lawson Innovations, how you built it from nothing. You seem to have forgotten the $1 million seed investment that got you started. Gregory looked at Lena, his face a mask of betrayal. That was your grandfather's trust. No, Lena said, speaking for the first time, her voice clear and strong. It was my trust, from my mother's side. It was Devereaux money, Gregory. You built your entire company on the simple foundation you just spat on. Josephine smiled, and a very good investment it was. But you see, my company Devereaux Holdings doesn't just invest. We acquire. When your company was struggling 3 years ago during that unfortunate over-leverage situation, you were desperate for a cash infusion, a silent partner. She paused, letting the implication land. Gregory's face was sheet white. No, the silent partner was JH Group, a Swiss holding company. Josephine finished for him. That is a wholly owned subsidiary of Devereaux Holdings. My company, Mr. Lawson, owns 60% of your company. I am your boss. I am your partner. And as of tonight, I am your worst nightmare. The room was in chaos. People were standing, whispering, pointing. This wasn't just a speech. It was a corporate execution. You see, Mr. Lawson, I have a morality clause in all my contracts, Josephine boomed. A clause that states I will not do business with anyone who demonstrates a fundamental lack of character integrity or basic human decency. And what you did on this stage tonight, what you have been doing to my daughter for the past 5 years, is a catastrophic breach of that contract. She looked over at the host, who was standing slack-jawed in the wings. Therefore, effective immediately, the Metropolitan Foundation officially rescinds the Pinnacle Award from Mr. Gregory Lawson. A collective shriek went up. And, Josephine added, her voice dropping, effective at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Devereaux Holdings will be calling in its entire debt line, dumping its 60% stake, and filing a motion with the board to remove you as CEO pending a full forensic audit of your expenses. She looked pointedly at Bianca, including but not limited to company-funded apartments, vacations, and of course Atelier Versace gowns. Bianca stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. He told me it was a corporate bonus, she shrieked at Gregory. You liar, you loser. She picked up her champagne flute and in a perfect dramatic arc threw the contents directly in Gregory's face. She then grabbed her gold clutch and stormed out of the ballroom, shoving a waiter out of her way. Gregory just sat there, dripping with champagne, and ruined his life, utterly, completely, and publicly detonated. Gregory sat paralyzed, a grotesque statue of ruin. The champagne dripped from his chin onto his lapel, mingling with the sweat of pure, unadulterated terror. The cameras which had adored him an hour ago were now vultures, their flashes documenting every twitch of his crumbling facade. He was in this moment the most photographed failure in New York. He looked at Lena. His eyes, stripped of their arrogant fire, were now hollow, begging. He didn't see a wife. He saw a lifeboat. He half stumbled, half crawled from his chair, reaching for her hand, his voice a pathetic gurgling rasp. Lena, baby, please. He stammered, his hand shaking violently. You have to tell her. It was a joke. Just a stupid, terrible joke. Tell her to stop this. It's me. It's us. Lena looked down at the hand reaching for hers. The hand that had held Bianca's. The hand that had gripped her arm in their penthouse. She felt nothing. No anger, no hatred. Just a vast, arctic calm. The man she had loved was a memory. This thing was just a consequence. I didn't know, he pleaded, his voice breaking. You never told me. You let me look like a fool. Her gaze, caught and clinical, rose to meet his. A fool, no, Gregory. You did that all on your own. Stop this, he begged. Tell her to call it off. The grant, the company. It's our life. Tell her to. Lena looked at him. Truly. Looked at him, and saw him for the small, frightened grifter he had always been. "Stop what, Gregory?" she asked, her voice calm and clear, cutting through his panicked sobs. "Stop her from telling the truth. You love the truth. You just said so on stage. You were magnificent, remember?" She pulled her hand back out of his desperate, grasping range, and then with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen, Lena stood up. The entire ballroom watched. She was no longer the humiliated wife, an object of pity. She was the epicenter. She bent slightly, picking up her simple, elegant velvet clutch from the table. She smoothed the front of her simple dress, an action so mundane, so unhurried, that it felt like the most profound gesture of power in the room. Gregory scrambled to his feet, his desperation turning, as it always did, to his last remaining weapon rage. His face contorted. "Lena!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Don't you walk away from me! Where do you think you're going?" "I am still your husband." His words echoed in the sudden dead silence. It was his final, pathetic attempt to claim ownership, to assert a control that had evaporated. Lena paused. She did not turn her full body, only her head looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was not one of anger, but of finality, like a judge pronouncing a sentence that had been written long ago. "No, Gregory," she said, her voice carrying in the hush. "You're not my husband. You're just the man I've been supporting. And my dividends. They've just been reallocated." The financial metaphor was a perfectly placed stiletto, the only language he truly understood. She saw the comprehension, the final devastating understanding hit his eyes. She turned away from him and began to walk. It was not a retreat. It was a procession. She did not walk to the exit. She walked with the same measured, powerful grace her mother had shown toward the stage. The sea of billionaires and socialites parted for her. The whispers that followed her were no longer of pity, but of awe. She was no longer the baker. She was no longer the simple wife. She was Lena Devereaux. She reached the stage and ascended the steps not as a victim, but as the victor. She stood beside her mother, two queens, surveying their kingdom. Josephine's eyes were alight with a fierce, profound pride. She didn't hug her daughter. It wasn't the time. Instead, she handed Lena the microphone. The gesture was a coronation. Lena took it. Her hand was perfectly steady. She turned, facing the room, facing the man who had tried to destroy her. She looked out at the sea of shocked, fascinated faces. "I apologize," she said, her voice ringing with the same innate authority as her mother's. The room held its breath. "I apologize that you all had to witness my soon-to-be ex-husband's final performance." She paused, letting the words land. He was right about one thing tonight. He has come a very, very long way from the man I married. So far, in fact, that I no longer recognize him at all. She then locked her gaze on Gregory, who was now being flanked by two large, unimpressed security guards. They hadn't touched him yet, but their presence was a cage. "Tonight," Lena continued, her voice a clarion call of absolute clarity. "He tried to make me small. He called me simple. He mocked my work. He defined me as a hobbyist. He kept around to remind him of his humble beginnings." She panned her gaze across the room, meeting the eyes of the women who had pitied her. "Let me be clear. A woman's worth is never defined by her husband's success. It is not defined by his approval, and it is certainly not defined by his public ridicule." Her eyes snapped back to Gregory. "Gregory," she said, and her voice, amplified, was the only sound in the world. You called me your rock. You were right. But you fundamentally misunderstood what that means. A rock is not something you stand on to make yourself look taller. A rock is not a prop for your fragile ego. She took a step forward, commanding the very spotlight that had been used to shame her. A rock is a foundation, and when you try to build a house of lies on a foundation of integrity, the foundation wins. It doesn't move. You just break yourself against it. Or in your case, a rock is what sinks you to the bottom when you've been tied to it for far too long. A collective audible gasp went through the room. It was an execution. Lena held his gaze for 1 second longer, then dismissed him. She turned to her mother. "Mom, I think we're done here." "I agree," Josephine said, taking the microphone back. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your donations. Please enjoy your dessert." Together, mother and daughter, the two most powerful women in the room, turned their backs on the wreckage and walked off the stage. As they reached the grand lobby, the chaos erupted behind them. Gregory's voice, no longer commanding, was a pathetic, hysterical shriek. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I am Gregory Lawson." "Yeah," a new bored voice, a security guard's, replied. "You're the guy we're throwing out. Move it." Lena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The noise of the ballroom, the pop, pop, pop of flashbulbs, Gregory's pathetic shouts, it all faded muffled by the heavy doors closing behind them. They were alone in the vast, quiet marble lobby. Lena's phone, deep in her clutch, gave a single, muffled buzz. She paused, pulling it out. It was a news alert from the Wall Street Journal. Lawson Innovations, Law I, in free fall, down 80% in after-hours trading following CEO's gala scandal and Devereaux Holdings' public divestment. She read it. She felt no spike of triumph, no thrill of revenge. She felt a correction, a balancing of the scales, a messy, painful equation that had finally been solved. She silenced the phone, slipped it back into her bag, and took her mother's arm. She inhaled a deep, full breath that filled her lungs for the first time in a decade. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Lena Devereaux felt completely, utterly, and simply free. The 6 months that followed, the gala of the Great Collapse, as the tabloids had dubbed it, were not a quiet recovery. They were a controlled demolition and a ground-up reconstruction. For Gregory Lawson, the fall was as fast as it was brutal. The abyss he had dangled over Lena had opened beneath his own feet. We find him not in a penthouse, but in a cramped, fluorescent-lit office in a Queens strip mall, the air smelling of stale coffee and desperation. The view from the smudged window was of a parking lot and a discount tire store. His new lawyer, a public defender in a suit that looked slept in, slid a piece of paper across the particle board desk. "They're offering a plea, Greg. It's the best I'm going to get for you," the lawyer said, his voice flat. "Devereaux's people are thorough. The SEC is buried in a mountain of evidence your own innovations provided. Wire fraud securities, fraud embezzlement of corporate funds. They've got you on everything." "Everything," Gregory whispered. He'd lost 30 pounds. The arrogant, preening man from the gala was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost. What does it mean?" "It means you plead guilty, you show remorse, and you get 5 to 7 years, the lawyer said, not looking up from his file. "You go to trial. You'll be making parole applications when you're 60. Devereaux's lawyers won't just win, Greg. They'll make an example of you. You tried to build an empire on a Devereaux's money. You're lucky they're not asking for treason." 5 to 7 years. Gregory choked. That's my life. That's what's left of it, the lawyer said, finally looking at him. Sign the paper, Greg. Gregory thought of Lena. He had tried to call, dozens of times. He'd left frantic, sobbing messages from burner phones. He'd sent emails. All had vanished into a digital void. The penthouse he'd discovered in the most humiliating way possible by having his key card declined had been in her name. The accounts he'd thought were his were joint, and Josephine's legal team had frozen them, seizing back every dollar he had stolen, every expense he had faked. He had tried the press, of course. In one last, pathetic gasp of narcissism, he'd contacted a gossip reporter, trying to spin a tale of a deceitful, gold-digging wife who had trapped him. The reporter had laughed at him. The video of him mocking Lena, followed by Josephine's surgical takedown, had been viewed over 200 million times. He wasn't a villain. He was a meme, a global punchline, a cautionary tale told in business schools. He picked up the pen. His hand, once steady enough to command a boardroom, was shaking. As for Bianca, she had pivoted with the predatory instinct of a shark. The day after the gala, she sold her tell-all, a wildly fabricated story of how she too was a victim of Gregory's web of lies for a meager sum. The check had bounced, but the infamy was enough. The last anyone saw of her, she was a mid-season replacement on a minor reality TV show, The Real Housewives of Secaucus. Her face a little tighter, her voice a little shriller, still desperately grasping for the relevance she had touched for a single fleeting evening. But this story was never about them. It was about Lena. The boardroom of Devereaux Holdings on the 80th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park was the antithesis of the gala. It was silent, minimalist, and flooded with natural light. The long, imposing table was made of a single continuous piece of reclaimed Wyoming redwood, its surface polished to a mirror finish. It was a table built for substance, not for show. At its head sat Josephine, and to her right, in the seat of the newly appointed co-chair of the Devereaux Foundation, sat Lena. The transformation was breathtaking. The tiredness that had clung to her like a shroud was gone. Her hair was cut in a sharp, stylish bob that framed a face alive with purpose. She wore a crimson power suit, her eyes bright and focused. She was not the woman who had been humiliated at the gala. She was the woman who had been forged in its fire. The final liquidation of Lawson Innovations is complete. A man in a crisp suit reported, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. After the SEC fines and creditor settlements, Mr. Lawson's personal assets are officially zero. The intellectual property was, as you suspected, negligible. Good, Josephine said, her voice neutral. Wipe it from the books. A failed experiment. And Ms. Lawson, the man said, turning to Lena with a deference Gregory had never afforded her. The national rollout of Lena's Kitchen is proceeding ahead of schedule. The flagship store in Soho opens next week. The press is ecstatic. Vogue is calling you the billionaire baker who beat the bully. Lena smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. I'm not a fan of the title, but I am a fan of the result. Let's move on. The foundation. She stood, and the room's entire focus shifted to her. She commanded it not with volume, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. The Devereaux Foundation for Women in Business has been officially chartered, she announced, her voice clear and strong. My mother and I have endowed it with its first $50 million. She paused, letting the number land. This is, as some of you know, the exact sum of the rescinded grant from the Metropolitan Gala. A quiet murmur of approval went around the table. My mission for this foundation is personal, Lena continued. We will be seeking out the simple ideas, the hobbies, the small women-owned businesses that are being overshadowed by louder, flashier, male-dominated competitors. We are not just investing money. We are investing belief. We will fund the women who are told to stay grounded while their male counterparts are praised for flying high. We will provide the capital, the legal framework, and the mentorship to ensure that their foundations are built on granite, not on sand. I want to fund the women who are told they belong at home so they can go out and own the building. The applause was real. It was a sound of deep respect. Later that day, Lena was not in the boardroom. She was in Soho at the new flagship location of Lena's Kitchen. The space was beautiful, all exposed brick, warm copper, and the intoxicating smell of fresh bread and cardamom. She was wearing jeans and an apron, a light dusting of flour on her cheek. She was laughing with her new head pastry chef, tasting a new matcha and yuzu creation. She was a CEO. She was a baker. She was, for the first time, wholly and completely herself. That evening, she and Josephine stood at the massive floor-to-ceiling window of the Devereux Holdings office. The city glittered below them, the same carpet of diamonds she had once viewed from her penthouse prison. Now it looked different. It wasn't a wall. It was a map. He tried to call me again, Lena said quietly, not taking her eyes off the view. From the correctional facility, his lawyer passed on a message. He said he was sorry. Josephine sipped her coffee, her expression unreadable. He's not sorry he did it, Lena. Lena turned. He's sorry he got caught. Exactly, Josephine said, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. Regret is for the sin. Remorse is for the consequence. He only feels the latter. Lena nodded, the last lingering ghost of her old life finally evaporating. She no longer felt anger or even pity. Just closure. I don't know if I ever thanked you, Mum, Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. For all of it. For letting me try to do it on my own. For letting me make my own mistakes. And for being there when the mistake was too big to fix alone. Josephine put her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. My love, you did do it on your own. You built a successful business. You endured an impossible man. You found your strength even when you thought it was gone. I just turned on the lights so you could see the stage. Lena leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. She looked down at the city, at the endless, sprawling web of lights and lives, and she finally understood. Gregory had tried to make her a footnote in his story. He had tried to call her a simple rock, a prop to make him look better. But he had been wrong. She was not a rock. She was the mountain. She was no longer a simple woman, or a victim, or a wife. She was Lena Devereux, co-chair of the Devereux Foundation, CEO of Lena's Kitchen, and master of her own fate. She was no longer a supporting character in someone else's fraudulent life. She was writing her own script, and she was just getting started. The moment Josephine Devereux took that mic, it wasn't just a husband's life that was ending. It was a wife's life that was beginning. Lena was reminded that her value was never ever determined by the man who refused to see it. It was determined by her character, her strength, and as it turned out, her multi-billion-dollar inheritance. Gregory learned the hard way, never ever underestimate the simple woman sitting next to you. You might just be a guest at her mother's party. What did you think of Lena's revenge? Was it the perfect act of karma? Or was it too brutal? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you love stories where karma comes knocking, make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.